You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold. And we have two very special guests on the show with us today. Our new friends, we have Karen Ware Jackson and Bromleigh McCleneghan. Did I get that right?
You did.
Yeah. That's exciting. We're going to start the day out well. But Karen and Bromleigh, thank you so much for being on and sharing your work with us. Would you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and just kind of we'll start there.
Absolutely. Well, I'm Karen Ware Jackson, and I am a pastor in Greenville, North Carolina. My husband and I actually are the co-senior pastors of First Presbyterian in Greenville, North Carolina, which is East Carolina, where East Carolina University is.
Okay.
We have two children who are just fantastic and fun and ask lots of good questions. And we enjoy pastoring and parenting and doing all that together. And so Bromleigh and I worked on this book together, When Kids Ask Hard Questions.
Awesome.
Karen and I, though we had both been participants in Young Clergy Women International, the book is sort of, it's published through Chalice through the Young Clergy Women imprint. But so despite both being members, it's a large organization, and we'd never met before working on this project together. But I am a pastor in suburban Chicago in Hinsdale, Illinois. I'm the associate pastor for ministry with families at Union Church of Hinsdale, which is a UCC congregation, though I'm ordained as a Methodist. And right now I'm actually also acting senior pastor because as of Sunday, my senior's on sabbatical. So I am learning about just really how many more emails I can receive every day.
Bromleigh does all the things.
I do all the things today.
Do all the things, right? That's great. So I love that you all met at an event or through another organization, because that's how Matt and I met. We met when I lived in New Mexico. He was in Oklahoma. We physically met in Dallas, Texas on a trip to go to the Philippines.
Wow.
And so, I love that we have that kindred spirit of here's how we connect with people through all of these spaces, and then work to produce this work and have this passion for these
we
projects.
did the work all on, basically just all online, edited the whole book, never in the same place, never meeting. And then just before the book was printed, we met last summer in July.
Fantastic.
In real life.
Right.
In real life.
Right. That's fantastic. I love that so much. Well, tell us about this book, When Kids Ask Hard Questions. If you're looking at the video, there's bright yellow cover here on the screen. Tell us a little bit about it.
You came in on the ground level. You talk about
it. This book came together as it started out as kind of a joint idea between Chalice and Young Clergy Women, thinking about just topics and that parents, especially progressive, wanting to come up with a book for progressive parents. I'm speaking not only about how to raise your children in the faith, but there are a lot of more conservative parenting, Christian parenting books, but there are fewer. Not none there, but there are fewer progressive parenting books, Christian parenting books. And so this started there and started coming up with things that we wanted to cover. And then Bromleigh and I started working on it, and we moved to this idea of having it be about the questions kids ask. Because if you work with kids at all, whether you're as a parent or as a pastor, as a Sunday school teacher, as a grandparent, as an aunt or an uncle or a teacher, whatever it is, chances are you're going to get one of those doozies of a question, thrown at you.
Mm-hmm.
and you got to say something. And what you say, you want it to be true,
mm-hmm.
and you want it to be you want it to be faithful to what you believe, but you also want it to speak to where the child is in that moment. And a lot of what we believe can be very abstract, can be very difficult for kids to grasp. And so we don't want to, you want to be able to say something that speaks to them, but also leaves room for further discussion, further growth, further understanding on their part, more and more and more conversations. So
yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I think the move from, so initially it was sort of, we had this thought about, and the book is still set up with how do you craft conversations? And here are some tools to do that. But and I don't know, I find in the parenting groups that we do, and at church, folks are always why would I talk about this stuff with, my kids? And I think I got interviewed by the Hinsdalean, which is our local weekly paper in Hinsdale, and the headline was should you talk about hard things with kids? As if you have an option.
Right.
Anyway, but that moved to the sense that you don't really have a choice. So it's really a question of are you going to do this well? And how can we help resource folks? With some other folks who have already done reflecting on it.
Yeah, I love that. Both Matt and I are parents, and I can't speak for Matt, but I know in my experience, my wife and I we've got an almost 13-year-old, an almost 10-year-old, and an almost 7-year-old. And getting them to talk and getting them to share and getting them to be in those spaces willingly is so hard sometimes. And then it's usually out of the blue where they're like, hey, what about this? You're like, oh crap. I was not prepared for this, and so going online and there are countless blogs and books and everything from whatever perspective, and you never know what you're going to get. My wife and I have gone through and just read countless things, and so much of it's really can be really judgy and pointed and just make you feel like crap as a parent. You're like, oh, I'm not doing it right, And so to have a collection of conversations and things all together from people who have been vetted and trusted and, all of those things is so helpful. Not only as a clergy person but as a parent first, of here's a resource that has so much value and so much information to just dig into and make it okay, and still at the end of the day say, well, I don't know, but we'll try, and so thank you for putting all of that together in such a way that is, just meaningful to people, rather than pointing the finger or, anything else that we see online or in person or in parent groups or mom groups or however. There's so much negative space out there, I suppose. And I think this is bringing light in a very positive way.
Yeah, we really it is certainly a book from a progressive Christian perspective, but we really wanted to leave room for people to come up with their own words for their own faith. And so you might read an essay in here and say, you know what, I don't actually believe it. Or I see that this person, talked to their kids about this, but I don't feel comfortable. And, we've left a lot of space for that. We're not saying you should say X, Y, Z. What we try to have everyone do is consider, when you read the essay, it gives you, it might give you words, or it might give you a foil to come up with, what you really do believe or what you would say. Different questions, things to talk about. If you are have a partner in this, whether it's a co-parent or whether it's a co-teacher, or maybe you're the pastor and you want to, talk to parents. You don't always have the authority. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't have the authority to provide, whatever guidance. So we really try to think through that and help people develop their own language for what they want to say.
And I think along that too, nothing bores me more as a reader and as pastor, like listening to other people's sermons and things, than like someone who's going to tell me something that like 100 people have already said before, like in pretty much the same way as if it is revolutionary. And I mean, like there's nothing new under the sun. Fine,
Right.
fair. Like we're not reinventing everything all the time, but I think it was important for us to say, sometimes the ways that we've talked about these things have not been great.
Right.
And it's worth taking some time to really think about the theological implications, and to really think about like how what we think we're saying, or what we think we know actually meshes with what's going on in the world, in some really grounded ways. And I think that making the connection and sort of challenging even our assumptions of what's the go-to Christian response was important. That I think makes this a really nice contribution.
Yeah, no, I think so. And gosh, I love the willingness to leave space, and to own, hey, we're not saying anything new, but here it is, and here it is in a way that is hopefully fruitful for you, where you can come to your own conclusions and insert your own words or own conversation, but here's a starting place. And please disagree, please have that permission to be who you are as a parent, as a pastor, as a leader, and go from there. Gosh. Yeah.
Well, that's where, like, for me, when I was looking over this book a week ago, there were a couple authors. I mean, I know Yuki. She and I went to seminary together, and I was like, wow, like, so I was like, I jumped to that one and read that one. I was like, yeah, that, like, but one of the things that struck me was in Karen, in your opening chapter, you had the Faith Five, and I was like, and I don't remember where I was at, but I took a picture of it and I sent it to my wife. I said, like, look, like, let's talk about this when I get home in like 2 weeks. And let's think about some ways that we could incorporate this in our lives. Cause we have a 12-year-old going on 30, and then a 9,
I have that one too.
Yeah. A 10-year-old, that, also is going on 30 to 40. And, their theological depth, is almost scary because it's so deep, and their Sunday school teachers don't know how to handle some of the things that they do. And so, like, we know that not necessarily in Sunday school they're going to get the depth that they need. And so, like, finding something that we can provide for them in a healthier way, where it's not like, all right, Dad's the pastor, he's trying to do his pastoral thing, but like to have a genuine conversation. Like, I found that to help provide some kind of guidelines of having a genuine conversation that I think in a lot of our homes gets lost, and we've just forgotten how to do it. And we've forgotten how, I like how, like, the recommendation of using scripture or something else is vital to that conversation too. I just feel like that's like something in the book that can be very helpful for families who are looking for something to help their families kind of cohesively come together in faith and share life together.
I was just, Rich Melheim is the one who copyrighted the Faith Five.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And you can use it, but the thing I love about it so much is it's just like the most simple thing, because you're like, oh, I do all these things. I talk to my kids about what they do in their day. Great. I share with them. We discuss, maybe we're not always reading scripture, but a lot of times we're reading something, even with young, tiny kids. And I think we do lose some of that when they get a little older, that like sit together and read time. So it encourages that back. We talk about it. We pray together, and we do like a good night, a good night kiss, and we changed it in our house to a good night blessing. But this takes it and just makes it all perfectly mutual. It's like, I ask them about their day, but then I tell them, we talk about my day too. What was the hardest thing that happened in my day? Not just, what the sad things that happened in your day. And when we talk about the Bible, it's not just me saying, oh, this, let me tell you about this or that. It's always, the whole thing is about mutuality, and, you share, they share, back and forth. And it feels just very simple. It doesn't feel like this big scary thing you have to add into your day. It's like, I'm doing all these things. I might not be doing them like in a very, detailed, like a 5-step process. Right. And you don't actually have to do it in a 5-step process.
It'll still work.
Kind of, I mean, I certainly don't. So I'm a fan of it.
Yeah. I think that we're having a pastoral thing, and a thing, and it's astounding. The parties in the household are having trouble figuring each other out, and each other's perspective, and it's amazing to me how sort of reticent they are to just like increase the volume of conversation they have. Like how firmly I believe that like things would be so much better if they just talk to each other more, like and I think that's the thing with the kid, it's like not every conversation should be like a talk about a thing, right? Yeah. Like we should just be communicating regularly with each other in our families. That's a thing. And so I really appreciate Karen's setting up of just like, this is a thing, right? Like parenting or working with and being with children in relationship is about actually having a relationship with them. I'd like to, it is true. Like I read less with my older ones. I didn't say this. I have 3 daughters, almost 13, 10 in the spring, and 4.5. So, yeah. Got reappointed. So like the older one, we don't read with them as much. But like Fiona, our oldest, was assigned to watch the State of the Union, or at least 10 minutes of it on Tuesday. And like we sat and watched, passively and calmly with her, and without interjecting anything. But it was really a good way for us to like then have some fruit for conversation about a whole mess of things after that. And so yeah, I think it's really nice to have it pointed out too, that like it doesn't just have to be read the Bible together. Like anything can become fruit for reflection.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love the pointed intention of let's have conversations with our children, because one of the problems we see in the church, and in my opinion, is we want young people, we want children, we want youth, we want young people, and the question becomes, well, why aren't they here? Well, they're not here because you've never let them have the conversation, and now that you think that they're old enough, probably because they're married and have kids now, that they're old enough, responsible enough that now they can enter into the conversation, and we've lost them, right? Because we weren't having the conversation with them before. And I think we find that in our own family systems of, maybe if you look 25, 30 years ago in the parenting style of you're to be seen and not heard, and just be here, whether that's in family system or churches or public or wherever. And now we're wondering why young adults and
this huge mystery
new families
no one can put their finger on.
Right. And some of the most fruitful conversations I've had with all of my kids, rural Montana, we drive everywhere. It's a 45-minute to an hour drive everywhere. And often I find it either with the whole family or just a section of my family. And it's a time on the road just to go, how's it going? Some of the most deep theological reflections on humanity and the way that God sees people from my 12-year-old have come sitting in the car and her going, what the hell? Why are people acting this way? Because she's paying attention to the world in the United Methodist Church and the world broadly, and what the perspective is living in Texas and New Mexico and now Montana and how that's different. And her going, what is happening? Why are people acting this way? And what can I do? How do I begin the conversation in my peer groups of, and just that space to go, here we are, you have my attention.
We lament the loss of the family dinner table a lot. I mean, you hear that all the time.
Yeah.
Some people still have the chance to do that. Some people don't. But I think what we need to do is just start reimagining or reanointing our other spaces. The car is, a great place.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard
they can't leave. No,
depending on whether you have your own, headphone situation, you might be able to do that. But we also have, I hear my kids, thank goodness so far, are too young to have phones, but I hear great things about people having text conversations,
Mm-hmm.
and using text as a way to reach out to their older children.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've heard of some, I even know someone who said that she and her college age son used to, he would call and say, I need to have a text conversation with you.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes he just needed that extra remove. And he wanted to, because she was not really a texter, but he would say, I'm going to call you. I'm going to start texting you, Mom. Like, I need you to be like in this with me. And
Yeah.
she would, and they would, and then she'd say, okay, they get off the phone, and then they text back and forth. And, so, but a lot of this also, I mean, with the technology, with FaceTime, and, whatever, Android, I mean, I use Google Voice or whatever. There's Facebook Messenger is one I use all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You can do these. I travel for work, and I do, nighttime blessings with my kids through we kiss the phone, we talk about our day, and it's great. My parents do this with my kids every Saturday. We have they live in Texas, we live in North Carolina, and they do a Skype or a FaceTime thing. And the technology we have can really be a space for real conversation, regular conversation.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, because I know we're kind of short. We've got a little bit of time. We want to make sure you give you space to be where you need to be your next appointment. And so, kind of jumping back to the book, for both of you, which chapter that you like? Which chapter spoke to you the most?
Ooh. Well, so we both have family members who wrote for the book. So obviously those.
Let's start there.
And there's so many that. So it was really fun to work on a project like this. So Chalice had a couple folks that they really wanted to include and ask to contribute essays. But then a lot of the other ones were sort of like people who we knew or had read or whose stuff we like, and so we were like, would you do this? And so it was really, so in some ways we got to, anyway, so I think it was neat to kind of like be able to offer folks. I mean, we have a couple folks who have like published a lot, but some who haven't necessarily. And so it was neat to be able to say, can you tell us what you know about this? And those were actually some of my favorites. I don't know, Karen, what do you got?
I have a similar stress. I mean, I'll tell you, one of the ones that hit me the hardest was talking with kids about gun violence. That's Allison Salem Miles. And she, the question that the kids ask is, Mommy, are the bad guys going to come to my school? Just, like that. Ooh, that is a hard hitting, and I will tell you, she pulls zero punches in that essay. And this is one actually that my husband and I disagree on. He read it and he was like, you can't say that to kids. And I was like, I don't know, maybe you can't say that to kids. Like, maybe we don't need to be talking about it this way. And so, the two of us had a whole conversation about that.
Yeah.
About whether that was the right approach, or what else would you say, or maybe, we were both still chewing on that one probably still chewing on it.
But it did exactly what it was supposed to do, right? Open the door for conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I really love Becca Gorell's essay. And then which she talks about that's what counts, navigating questions about gender and identity. And she does, I mean, she's writes specifically about questions of gender and identity, but she also talks very much, but she has some great like biblical stuff and kind of a powerful personal narrative, and also hammers this down to, this isn't a question, like for kids, this isn't a question about how we categorize human life or how we know what's true. You know, it's about how do they know who they can trust. And that is such a fundamental, you know, thing. So even if your kids never have any questions about gender and identity, I don't know, probably there's that kid somewhere, but they do, that your child will have questions about how we know who's trustworthy. What was the other one I wanted to? Oh, I mean, just so many of them are so good.
Rachel Keefe, she wrote a whole book, The Life-Saving Church, Suicide and Faith Communities, and she did one called God's Not a Fan, talking about suicide, and that was another one that hit me hard, because she pointed out a lot of that we do see children who are either making attempts on their life or sometimes completing attempts on their lives, and 7 young children. And a lot of the things that she brought up I hadn't thought about before. I had always dealt with it trying to make sure to comfort people that in these situations, you know, you don't want to think that the person was in such deep spiritual and emotional, physical, sometimes pain, that God would of course have compassion and love, and they would be in the full embrace of God after their death. And yet she made the point that sometimes you don't need to say, of course, it's perfectly, absolutely okay, because that might be the thing that's stopping somebody. And I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. And I really helped when she said God's not a fan. We actually had some people question that, or whether that will happen. But I thought that was helpful language for me for giving to a kid, to say that it's not that God doesn't love you or anything like that, but that God is about life. And how do you navigate that very complex road?
But again, like so many of these are not trying, are sort of trying to distill some clear things that will help you in helping your children to make sense and meaning of things, but never are folks saying this is simple, you know. I mean, like, it is complex, you know. I mean, the guy who wrote about mental illness and addiction is really writes far more frequently in poetry than in prose, and that ended up being kind of perfect, because it was like, you know, this is really complicated, and having some good metaphors is probably really a good thing to have on hand. And I think too, Elizabeth Gresham's is really powerful about forgiveness. And both hers coupled with like Sarah Lund's and even and the ones on
Sarah Lund wrote about bullying.
She wrote about bullying, and there's one on friendship, and then there's another one. There's a number of on race, and early on in the book, there's one about my child, how I would like you who have children without learning disabilities or differences, or are how I would like you to talk to your children about being friends with mine, you know. And all of those, I think, I mean, we wanted really hard to talk about like accountability and how, you know, like, and not tell kids that they have to like be friends with someone who hurt them, or, you know, or necessarily forgive someone who's done harm and hasn't like done any work of reconciliation, and to take accountability for their own actions. Sorry.
It's okay.
So passionate. The and so I think that like it's I don't know. I felt so proud of this book because I feel like all of these pieces are sort of beginning to vision for us like the world we want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the society that we want. We want kids who can understand and live with complexity. We want kids who can like feel empowered to seek their own health and wellness and wholeness, but also like be aware of the ways in which they might fail at that sometimes too, you know, and be open to learning new ways. So yeah.
Well, and I just as a pastor, I love that you brought in so many voices, because so often we get a book and it's one voice, one perspective, and it's typically usually trying to sell a book, and so it's guided in that direction. In this brings so many voices from a similar theological perspective, but different voices, so that when we read through this, we hear that. And when we hand it to people, we're handing them something that's not our voice. Because so often what our church gets is just our voice, right? And so to have that diversity, to have that tool to just hand to somebody and say, hey, here you go. Here's a whole lot of voices saying a whole lot of things. Where does your voice fit into that as well? I think is a wonderful example of how to have the conversation. That it's not one-sided and not from one person or one perspective, but here are a bunch. This is what the world looks like. I think that's such a beautiful thing that you guys have put together.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So,
Multiple voices.
so yeah, Karen and Bromleigh, anytime you're welcome to come back anytime and share with us whatever it is, even if it's not you two together, if it's one of you have like, hey, I actually have this project out too, we'd love to get that out. You know, we'd love to have you on the Bearded Theologians. The book is, for those of you that are actually watching the video, it's When Kids Ask Hard Questions.
I feel like we didn't have a warning that there was going to be a video.
So sorry. It's not our main thing, but
yeah,
it's
like
there.
Like maybe 10 people, but those 10 people are very active. And but for those of you who are listening, the book is called When Kids Ask Hard Questions. You can find it through Chalice Press. We encourage you to pick it up and utilize it either in your like small group circles. If you have a group of parents that get together, it's a great resource and tool to be able to work with one another on how to do this, because it does take a community to raise children. And if you can sit down with a group of people and wrestle with this together, I think you can find some great media of that in your community. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.